Well, those were just fabulous presentations. When we talked about the order, I thought it would be so great for us all to start with the strength of all the way on the left. There, good. To, of course, think about the amazing history that you have here in New York, and to start rooting what we're going to talk about in the amazing successes. And in fact, the presentations were even more kind of read my mind in terms of recommendations. So I think it's a very exciting moment to think about what we could get so that we could potentially have the mayor say all three of those things within 4 years or 3 years. I'm going to argue that it's time to talk about a public food system in a much more dynamic way, in the same way that we talk about public transit, public housing, and public libraries. Because though we speak about it in moments, and in fact, again, we learned so much from those two presentations about the amazing history. This is a little farmers market that we call good food markets in Toronto, because farmers won't let us call them farmers markets because we're not farmers, but we're actually progressive nonprofit jobbers, and there's imports as well as local, and those are community members in front of a social housing building. So I did this last night at Jan and Nick's class. How many people came here by the subway today, or transit? So you're lucky to live in one of the most amazing cities in the world, in which public transit has won. And it's understood that universally it is important. And I guess one of my big messages is I think it's time for you as food activists in New York to begin to think about your programs a bit more universally, and to think about the amazing process of non-stigmatization that happens in a public system, which we do not yet have in New York or in the United States, because you basically have a targeted, you've accepted that targeted programs are the best way to go. And I'm going to argue from the kind of global pitch that it's time to look at, if the crisis is what we think it to be, which is beyond hunger to health and agriculture, that it's time to look at it in this same way. And you'll notice that there's a contradiction between public transit, public housing, public libraries, because libraries are free. And so there's a debate, which we can hopefully get into later, about that. So just very briefly, I'm going to argue that we have market failure. And anybody who's taken any classical economics will understand that when you have market failure, a government is allowed and needs to intervene. And on every single indicator that we can talk about, on any issue related to the big system, we're not talking about whether or not there's more local food at a farmer's market, but on the big issues, which are related to some big numbers, and then of course it starts with global hunger. These have gotten worse in the last years. I've developed this Venn diagram when I came to FoodShare in the 90s as a way of conceptualizing what the problem is. And when you think about solutions, it may be very useful to ask yourself the question, does the solution address all three equally? Or does the solution that you're proposing only address one of these? And there are many times when you have to address one, and they're very autonomous and have very different dynamics. But I would argue that the most vibrant solutions are ones that are squarely in the middle, and that the market failure is there on purpose. In other words, we do not have hunger and obesity and destruction of agriculture by accident, but they're interrelated to a capitalist industrial food system that is trying to de-skill, create hunger, and create ill health. And the way it plays out is 1.1 billion people will go to sleep hungry tonight. And the UN, often says 800 or 900,000. And this has to do, imagine the next time the soil of Syria will grow healthy food. This is also a big gender issue. Majority of these people are women and children. It is also a big race issue. The majority of the 1.1 billion people who go to sleep hungry tonight are indigenous people and people of color and immigrants in the North. And we don't talk about that at all. And I think this is a huge issue for the food movement, that we have to begin to understand that the programs that we're developing are often developed by white people for others, and that we have to make sure to give voice. This is the food justice movement, and you have in the United States two amazing leaders, Erica and Will Allen, who are really trying to help us all learn about this, and we could talk about that forever. But this is about putting food last in priorities, and I'll talk a little more about that. And at the same time, we have to get our, where's our 1.1? Oh my goodness. It managed to lose itself, but anyway, I know it by heart. It's another slide that looks just like this, and it says 1.1 billion people will go to sleep tonight malnourished. So this is food and diet-related illnesses. And there's a great article, World Watch, July, August 2000, if you want to read it. It's the first time anybody postulated this idea that there's the same number of people who will go to sleep malnourished from overnourishment tonight. And, of course, we have hunger globally through biblical times and every other part of our history. But this is completely new. And, of course, it's growing at the rate of as higher. In fact, a recent article I read said 1.2 billion will go to sleep malnourished from the wrong kind of food tonight. And then at the same time, we have this third problem, which is a totally unsustainable agricultural system. So if we're looking at this market failure, what might be the interventions that could achieve it? And it is within the context here in New York, and it was great to see some of that old history, but we do need to go back 500 or 600 years. You know, how did people eat in this region 600 years ago? We know it to be true that the people who lived in this region were healthy, they had good hair and their eyes, and they lived longer than the people who came from Europe when they got here. They did not have diet-related illnesses. They had a food system that was based on fishing and hunting and gathering, and we've destroyed those methods of access. So why have we gotten to this mess, and what could be the solutions out of it? And it was very interesting, again, to root this in the history of New York, which is so interventionist. No governments actually think about this. So there is a Deputy Commissioner of Health and Healthy Food, which is a great new term for looking at the issues. And we certainly in public health have a great movement around the world of people who are really trying to focus at it. But what I'm trying to conceive of is another whole way. It would actually be a minister or a deputy or a commissioner actually responsible for food at all levels of government. In Brazil, their municipal government calls it the Department of Supplies. And again, I was so excited when Babette spoke, because part of my recommendation of my visit here is that New York should have a Department of Supplies. A department that will investigate and answer the question, how do the people of New York eat? I always get to say this, not in New York. In 9/11, there were exactly 3 days worth of food in New York City. What happens in a crisis situation? Where does the food come from? Can't be imported from afar in that great picture. We do want Parmesan cheese and prosciutto, but the other thing I've been really aware of in the 24 hours I've been here, and I grew up in New York, and it's great to be back, is just the lack of understanding of the region as an ecosystem. Partly the way the island works and the way New York works in New York State. I think around the world people think about the Greenbelt and the food production of their rural area a little more actively than you do. Certainly in Toronto we have not so much urban ag, but peri-urban ag is what we're thinking about. And I think there's a whole way of beginning to say, where can the food be grown and produced around 2 hours from New York City? And what would that region look like? What would that food shed look like if the markets were filled of those kind of foods? So we have commodified a basic need and created a monopoly game. So if you're out of money, you're out of luck. This is completely new in human history. FoodShare operates something called the Hunger Hotline, based actually on the New York Hotline, and we're not a food bank, and all the food we sell, but at discounted prices, but this is the one function that we have that's still connected to food banks. And I took a call once from a gentleman who was from Jamaica who said that he was looking for a food bank. And I asked him where he lived, because he had to be in the right catchment area for a pantry. And he said, I'm living in an apartment, I got clothes, I got a TV, but I'm hungry. In Jamaica, I didn't have a TV, I didn't have shoes, but I was never hungry. You know that the UN doesn't even catalog the production of vegetables and fruits in your backyard when they calculate global hunger, because they're only looking at calories from meat and grains. It's a hidden piece of our history that we mostly ate off of where we lived. And yet, in the 20th century, we changed that. So we've created this completely bizarre situation. So it is important that income is the single biggest problem to getting rid of hunger, and that's why probably everybody in this room advocates for increases to income, and that's why it's great that your mayor is talking that way. But I would say this is a reductionist argument. and that there is something called food security, which is different than income security. In the same way that housing security is not the same as income security, and we have a whole, and you've just heard about a great new housing development that is about subsidized housing, that we need to create a basket of goods and services that is income and food and housing and transportation and libraries and childcare, and they are all different. And the intervention around food is actually not more money, it is subsidized food. And this is very counterintuitive to progressive politics. I get into fights with any income redistribution people, and I myself have been an anti-poverty activist for years. But the idea is, can a public food system have subsidized food for everybody, the rich and the poor, as a way of dealing with the three market failures that I described? Could we have a public food system that would actually reduce the discrepancies between the haves and the have-not? Because the haves would be participating as well. So basically, on some weird level, food stamps for everybody, or a food card for everybody, or subsidized food for everyone. So I think these are pictures in Toronto, but again, you saw earlier ones that are very similar. We're doing really well. Our movement is, I'm shocked at how well we've done on some of this small incremental stuff around gardens and markets and school food. 20 years ago, I didn't think we'd be as far advanced as we are globally. There's an understanding of this stuff. But now the question is, are there bigger things that could be done? And what are the best ideas in the world? Well, the very best ideas, I think, are ones where governments have subsidized basic food. So is there anybody in the room from Carroll Estate? Last night at Nick's class there was. Often when I speak, there's somebody from Carroll Estate. So Carroll Estate, you might know, is the country in the world with one of the best examples of an intervention in terms of higher standards of living without higher GDP, women's rights, a very progressive state, one of the states in India. All of the good stuff they've done have been eroded by the World Bank forcing them to do it, but for 30 years they had a communist government that did a bunch of really exciting things, including subsidizing basic grains and beans for 98% of the population. So imagine that you go to any store and everybody in the whole society would get certain goods at a very reduced rate, but farmers get the full price. So that's the model. From Brazil, we have universal free school programs, but only in public schools. So the middle and upper class in Brazil kids do not benefit from this great advantage. We have rules in Brazil now around what percentage of food will be bought from the peri-urban small family farmers around. And that's the other thing that has to be, as we go through this conversation, there's no time for it now, but who are we subsidizing and what size are they? And again, you're so lucky to have John Pompadic as part of your team who can tell you from all the great work in Sweet Charity about what went wrong in the USDA surplus program. I still believe that in that moment of creating the New Deal around agriculture was the basic idea: farmers burning wheat because they couldn't get price, people rioting for bread, creating a program that would solve those problems, but all the ways in which they subsidized the larger rather than the smaller farmers, created a target program, didn't look at the question of what kind of food would be subsidized, but still in that moment some really important results. Brazil, for those of you might know, have this basket approach that I talked about. They've given people more money, they've given subsidized food, they've given programs, they've done educational work. So it isn't, again, one intervention, but a combination that has, I think, been proven to be the most effective anti-hunger, zero foam movement. Lula, when he first became leader, that's why it was so great to hear the April 1st, Lula did in the first day of his administration say he was going to end hunger. He had been hungry as a child and he was going to intervene. One small thing from British Columbia, which is one of our provinces in Canada, about 10 years ago, the Premier came to the cabinet and said, what's the budget of BC going to look like in the year 2018? And the finance people came back and said every single penny of the BC budget will be consumed with healthcare. There won't be any money for education or roads or anything else, because that was where it was going. And then he said, okay, give me all your best ideas. And he came up with the idea of subsidized local BC food for kids at school, fresh fruit and vegetables at school. So the idea of reducing healthcare, and again, you had so much good stuff in Christine's presentation on that. So then what happens to make sure this kind of stuff happen? And basically both in Toronto and in Belo Horizonte, which is this one city in Brazil that is the most advanced. You embed it in city government. And it's very interesting to me, and has been over the years as I've watched things play out in New York, that your movement is very strong outside of government, pushing government. You certainly have many people inside government who are your allies, but maybe it is a moment to say, let's take the supply and the health side together and create something inside the city government. And that probably, I think, would be my first recommendation of what comes out of this process, hopefully. So, this idea of how many days of food is there in New York City, what role for Department of Supplies, how this, again, hearing the amazing statistics that Christine gave us on how much food is bought and, where is that food coming from? And could those peaches not only be peaches, I think there are peaches that are grown in New York State, but also that are maybe canned in a micro enterprise rather than in a big corporate Dole plant, and what is the job creation components of it? What if you follow all the food that is eaten and try to figure out and that's, again, I remember the first time I heard that the Brazilians called it the Department of Supplies, I thought, how bizarre is that? Like, that sounds so militaristic. Like, what is that about? But it was such a brilliant idea that if you're going to get at this, you're going to have to look at it from the procurement. That's our Ontario Food Terminal. It is a slightly different terminal than yours. It is a terminal that restaurants go to as well. I understand that the reason it doesn't have meat, just produce. But it creates a dynamic where the fresh fruit and vegetables in Toronto are very accessible. And I was very pleased to hear that you did have the results. I have a picture of your terminal. Anyway, we'll get to it in a minute. So very important to have a terminal. I think it would have been a very distressing moment had that lease not been renewed. I think that you can't actually do all the things you're going to do unless you have a strong, at least one, maybe more terminals. But the second step are community hubs. So basically, my organization has an abandoned school that we've turned into a warehouse. And we then can create a more direct field-to-table. We actually invented the words field-to-table. One of Mary Lou Morgan did, and she did it about 6 months before she met me, and my last name is Field, so this was all very cool. And field-to-table has actually become a term known across North America or the world now. So in our way, we have an idea of how much food can be grown in our area, and again, this idea that I just said of how much food can be grown in the Greenbelt within 2 hours of New York City. And are there community organizations right now in New York who are ready to scale up to become these kind of nonprofit food hubs? Because there has to be a location. You can't just do this. The multinational corporate food system will become a massive distribution network unless communities and public groups can create an alternative hub. So either those big government hubs will work, or some combinations, or maybe there has to be one in each borough. So food centers and food hubs are now seen to be more than the distribution, but it's the education. Again, you heard so much of this in the previous two presentations. Place-making places where people create community. People have community kitchens, have gardens. They'll become a whole regional hub for all these education centers. My own organization has managed to grow its hub to be a fairly large group. We're I think the largest group of our kind in North America. 60 staff, a budget of $6.5 million a year. Very hard to raise, $2.5 million of payroll every single year. And we don't give any food away. We sell it all, but at discounted rates. And it was, I come from an immigrant Jewish background, and it was great to see those push carts and to know that somewhere in my head was this idea of, buy wholesale. So in our case, our food hub has allowed us to invent the Good Food Box, which was the first box program like it, I think in North America, actually, where now, of course, all the organic home delivery companies are modeled after. That box costs $18. We buy $13 worth of food. The equivalent organic box costs $34. I mean, we talk endlessly about all the distribution pieces here. We did try to get our TTC, which is our Transit Commission, to give us a little bus, and we're trying to go into low-income communities and sell it. Not working so well yet. We modeled this after fresh moves from Chicago. We're getting fresh fruit and vegetables into First Nations communities in the north of Canada, an amazing experiment that is really working. People who have been told by every study that will not eat fresh fruit and vegetables, Indigenous peoples on James Bay are buying caseloads of fresh fruit and vegetables. 1 week, somebody ordered mangoes instead of orange because by mistake it was on the line on top of it, and there had never been any any mangoes in this community, and people just gobbled them up. FoodShare's hub involves this whole process that you know of as community gardens and kitchens and school food programs. And we're looking at this angle I want to then come back to is, can a public food system heal rather than aggravate the divisions between the two cities that your mayor has been talking about? And what would that look like? That's a salad bar program in Toronto that I learned about from visiting a salad bar program in Santa Monica, California. Can public funding make sure that urban ag is not just for the wealthy? I was delighted to hear that this new housing project in the Bronx is going to have that large rooftop garden at the class last night. Some of the students had talked about how rooftop gardening in New York just seems like something the wealthy do. It doesn't seem something that low-income communities can access. Can a public food system make sure that the very expensive costs of rooftop and hoop houses and gardening in the winter months? Can subsidized food programs work? So that's a good food market in Toronto. That's a sacalao market in Brazil. And in Brazil, they like to walk around and buy things in a big bag. And sacalao means big bag in Portuguese. And the day I took the pictures on the side, the normal private sector sacalao would have been charging 72 cents a kilo. So the municipality just says anything in a low-income neighborhood will be set half price. In our case, that is, again, social housing in Toronto. Tara, who's the woman in the white headscarf, is the coordinator of the market, but she doesn't make any money to coordinate the market. She does it as a volunteer. She orders about $300 worth of food a week from us, and she resells it in the community just for food access. Is that a model that could work in any capacity here? Jan and I were in Brazil a couple years ago, and we saw a version of the sacalao market, which is this says sacalao abaste, which means sacalao against hunger, and this is the name of the store. And here the Brazilians are so innovative, and they had realized that just opening up all these little low-income markets, it would cost them too much money. And so they went to the private sector, and I was very delighted to hear about the chain of stores that you're working with, because maybe they would be the people who would do this. So what Jan and I saw in Brazil the day that we got this bag, imagine a small greengrocer that sells every imaginable every imaginable fresh fruit and vegetable you would want. But one lane, the first lane, was the city's anti-hunger campaign lane. And everything in that lane was set at 1 Rio a kilo. And so there was a tomato that was 1 Rio a kilo on that lane, and throughout the store there were 3 or 4 other tomatoes, different species, that were $2.49 or $2.79. So Jan and I asked the manager of the store, why would you do this? How can you serve that tomato? How can you sell that tomato for $1 when you sell that tomato for $2.49 or $2.79 a kilo? And he said, well, it's a loss leader. I make it up. I average it out. It brings in people who wouldn't come into the store otherwise. I like working in the city campaign, and it's very good for publicity. So the idea would be, and Jen and I got very excited about, and then we didn't pursue it, but hopefully out of this meeting we will, find somebody in New York who would like to, for the publicity of it, pilot with the food movement in the city on creating a city-run campaign that would be 10 or 20 items, all grown in New York State, all, of course, healthy items. There'd be all, and again, I was so delighted to hear the history of the woman in the 40s who was doing all this education, because the Brazilians are really into this too. You might have seen their new food guide. Their new food guide is a fabulous home cooking guide, and they have advertisements on how to eat and where the prices are better. Again, some of those, your early history is being very implemented in Brazil right now in terms of this idea of whole food cooking rather than just nutrients. This is in the middle, the guy in the red shirt is Lula, and the guy to his left was the Minister of Food Security and in the Lula government. So Lula, when he got elected to end hunger, made a Minister of Food Security whose job it was to figure out system-wide in the whole country where the food was coming from, who was going to get it, how they were going to get it, how healthy was it, the whole concept. They ended up getting into a fight, the Minister of Food Security and the Minister of Education, over school meals program. And so then Petraeus, who's the guy next to him, became the Minister of Social Development with a portfolio for food security. So this is a big issue. We who want a Minister of Food Security can see that it could be complicated. So it might be somebody with a portfolio responsibility for food security. So what happens through that lens then to Hunts Point? Does it become a place where nonprofits can go? Is there a partnership that you can work out where one of the houses has a specialty for all the school food programs, for all those government programs? Is there a way of using the incredible capacity that Hunts Point has to create this nonprofit presence? Or does it mean, do we have to go to this regional idea so that there may be regional hubs in all of the New York cities? So a few ideas to end with then. This idea of the New York Department of Supplies for adequate supply and distribution, expand New York's food terminal, create nonprofit food hub capacity, create an organic terminal or create markets that are organic terminals. I'm pretty sure that there's some organic presence and some small farmers at the big Hunts Point, but it's not basically geared to that size. It's geared to the big scale, those big trucks. The thing that we had presentations yesterday at Nick and Jan's class, and almost all the pictures were of trucks. And I think one of the big questions for the 21st century is going to be in a post-carbon world, or in a world in which global warming, I mean, we've had a terrible winter, right? So people can really understand what global climate change really means. It doesn't mean that it's going to get warmer. It's going to get weirder. And what is it going to mean to food production? What is that climate? I mean, how many trees did we lose in New York State, and how many plants? So there has to be some thought about the environmental implications of all this as we plan. Because again, seeing New York's history and thinking back to 1906, let's think to 2106. What is that food system going to look like? How do we eat? Where is the food grown? Maybe something that looks expensive and silly now, like rooftop gardens, might not be so silly if that is the way we're seeing things. So second idea is this private sector partners for the big bag, Sacalo aisles. Third is one that is just sort of at the experimentation level. But what if we picked 5 items, and these are 5 items I picked for Ontario. We could pick 5 different items for New York State. Jan was saying as our way over, she didn't like the soy nuts because of we could translate it. So imagine it's peanuts. So just pea as in dried green peas, which dry beautifully. So imagine these things: apples, carrots, cheese. We can take cheese out of it. Cheese is just one attempt to make it a little bit more mainstream, but probably you might want to do only vegetables and fruits. And yogurt. Production. So yogurt. We'll put yogurt in. And you make them all 20 cents a pound. And you sell it everywhere, including where people buy their cigarettes and candy bars. Every single store in New York City would sell these 5 things. And government picks up the tab, and it would be very interesting for somebody to analyze what that would cost. Farmers get the full cost of this. And it becomes part of a whole Buy New York. It becomes a marketing campaign. It has a whole education thing. It's for everyone. It's not for the poor. It's for everyone to eat this way. But you also, in the process, of course, create a huge shift for the poor. Another version of this is you mail $100 worth of vouchers to everybody for local foods, and you tax it back for people at a certain income. There's a variety of levers that you can use around this. Maybe it is the full food stamps for everybody. Maybe it's food stamps on your health card so that it's by your number of people in your family. I mean, it's just how do you open your mind to imagining all the ways you could subsidize basic food if your goal was to end hunger, make sure farmers in your region had long-term economic viability, and reduce health problems. You obviously will continue to expand public markets, street food, urban agriculture, school, and hospital healthy food. Obviously, hospital healthy food is a huge issue. I hear there is an experiment, and one of my favorite things that's going on a lot in California, which is prescription for, there's a typo there, for health through farmers markets and campaigns, right? So what if doctors start prescribing healthy food as people leave their doctor's office? I've been trying for years to get a doctor's office in Toronto to partner on the idea that you'd serve fresh cut up vegetables and fruits in the waiting room. So when you're waiting for your appointment, everybody's snacking on these plates. And you're also, I've been trying to get some long-term study. If every doctor prescribed vegetables and fruits at every visit, and then you followed those patients and saw reduce colds, reduce illness over decades, what could you prove in terms of that approach? And a thing that I haven't talked enough about, that all of this has to have a lot of culture in it. Food is about culture. Food is about creating all kinds of amazing opportunities for what I call the revolutionary potential of vegetables and fruits. So in that, I get to attack the wonderful breakfast that I had, or criticize the wonderful breakfast that we just had in the way that I do where I almost always speak, which is we basically serve the diabetes breakfast everywhere, rich or poor, whether it's a soup kitchen or a school food program. I went to Halifax on the east coast of Canada and got up early so I could go to the local breakfast program, and they were so proud. They were showing me what they served the kids, and the kids had cereal and milk, they had juice, they had a fruit plate, they had pancakes and syrup. And I had, in the fancy hotel I was staying at, the fanciest hotel in Halifax, ordered the breakfast, and I had room service and had the diabetes breakfast. I had a croissant, and I had jam, and I had we got to start eating vegetables for breakfast. We got to relocate like FoodShare says, vegetables and fruits, not fruits and vegetables. We're all of us hooked. We just have had all this recent research on sugar. So I'll end with a few ideas for all of us to do as we move forward in the last minute, which is to taste 10. Oh my God, it's my old slide. 10, I've turned this around usually. Taste 10 vegetables and fruits every day. I think you all know that the average North American still eats how many vegetables? 2.8, I think it is, up to, and that's white potatoes and included in there. And, doctors are scared to say, so we say 5 because we think people freak out if we tell them 10. But it's in the therapeutic benefits of 8 to 10, and it's 7 servings of vegetables and 3 of fruit. Fruit gets us into a whole thing related to how we feel about sweets. Eat local, organic, and fair trade as possible. And I was really delighted to see that slide around New York as the import capital. I don't think it's about only local. It's not just about, there's going to be the need for a papaya and a mango and a banana and Parmesan cheese and olives and pepper and coffee. So there's fair trade. And then eat more sit-down home-cooked meals together. And when I was talking about the cultural thing, one of my favorite global cultural things is from France, which is a couple times they've actually sat down and had a meal, I think, from Paris to Marseille and a big table, right? So imagine a big festival that is New York Eats, right? Everybody stops what they're doing and has a big meal wherever they are. People just walk out into the streets and have a meal, shut down some streets. And this individual action then creates the basis of a whole bunch of community action and a whole bunch of government action, including the need to create these ministries of food security or procurement at all the levels of government. So thank you.